Okay. There we go.
Let go. Did you hear it?
Yeah.
Did you hear it? Let go. Let go, let go, let's go. You didn't have blankies on you.
I stuffed it there because I was cleaning up here. I was putting the
Roast.
stuff away.
Take your shoes off. Hey? Nice and cozy. Ooh.
There.
Oh.
So this is not taking room.
Oh. Cozy. Oh. There we go. Oh, set, Mum. Oh. Pooh.
Okay, so there's
Pooh. Pooh. Yeah.
This is in front of AC.
Put it in there, jam it in there then. There you go.
Yogurt.
Excuse me. That door locked?
I don't
Yeah.
have my phone. It's in the bag.
Ooh.
Put chapstick. Oh, here. Might as well leave this out. Yeah.
Yeah, once upon a time.
Oh, look at the lamb was in there.
Woo. Bye bye. Good riddance.
Well, the view is beautiful around here, don't get me wrong. It's probably the only best thing that was nice. So if I just want to grab something to blow my nose.
Turn right onto Trans-Canada Highway. Continue on current road for more than 50 kilometers.
Yeah, I'll be alright. At least for a few hours.
No.
I'm fine, thanks, man. Look at that tree standing there. That's kind of weird, eh?
Yeah, it's someone that did that. It's walking.
Turn
Looks
right
like-
to
it
get
looked
to
like,
downtown Golden or to visit Kicking Horse Mountain
Groot.
Resort.
What is in
I'll
the
have directions. Stay
Guardians of the
straight
Galaxy?
to keep
What
going
is that
towards Lake
tree
Louise.
plant thing?
Sorry?
What is that tree plant called in Guardians of the Galaxy?
A Groot?
Groot? Is it Groot? That's kind of what it looks like. But
The trees.
We're leaving Golden eastbound into the Rocky Mountains. We've begun our climb out of the Rocky Mountain Trench that divides the Rocky Mountain from the Purcell Mountains behind us. We're facing an historical mountain, Mount 7. Yes, like the number 7. It's named Mount 7 because in the late spring and early summer, there's a ridge and depression below the summit that holds the snow after the rest melts off. The snow in this depression forms a perfect 7. The next 10 minutes or so of our drive is going to be quite winding and slow, especially if we get stuck behind a truck or a big RV. Be patient. There is no opportunity to pass until the highway straightens out again. Once we reach a nice free-flowing straight section, I'll tell us more about what's ahead. Once we pass the last motels, keep an eye out for bighorn sheep on the sides of the highway. I'd estimate that they're here about 70% of the time.
I don't have a hotel booked after tomorrow. Tonight is our last hotel, so we'll have to book another one tonight.
Okay. That's the one that's going to be in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, if we can think we can go all the way to Regina, we can go, or we can stop in Moose Jaw, whatever.
Yeah, okay.
We'll just keep driving, stop when we're tired, have a break, have a coffee or something, tea, and then go again.
Oh, we can't drive all the way tomorrow.
Oh, I know that.
Oh, that'd be too much. Don't want to pull that
So we're going to have to stop when we can then.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
She's so cute. She's so pretty, but...
Yeah, she certainly is.
Try to see if they like climb on the sides or anything like that, right? Because they like to climb. Not too close.
As you can see, this is a challenging section of the highway as we negotiate our way through the Kicking Horse Canyon.
Oh yeah.
The walls are steep and the rock can be relatively fragile. There isn't much room here to put in a straight 4-lane highway as the terrain is like this all the way from the top down to the river. The netting that you see is to control the path of falling rocks. Most of the time it's very successful, but some of the time it's not, as we can tell by the scars on the road. The reason the rock is unstable is the action of freezing and thawing. Water will find its way into the cracks, and when it freezes, it expands, and the rock will sometimes give into the pressure and break. Sedimentary rock is notorious for this in this type of climate, where winters are harsh and frozen. There have been occasions where the rock slides have been large enough to entirely close the highway and need a major cleanup effort. In sections that are now bypassed, the edges of the highway have fallen away. Never with serious consequences, thankfully. Much construction and improvement have been made through the bottleneck area that we're driving through today. But the solution to the canyon has not yet been completed. Time and money will tell.
You have to have your own thing, that's okay.
See, there's lots of avalanches.
Once upon a time, we say the little boy was playing with the llama. Says you have to catch him. The llama's cute.
Ooh, there's water coming down that. Cool.
Llama's cute.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay. That's all. Just because of yesterday, or just, you know, that's all.
A bowl coat.
Oh, looks like there's a lot of water that goes to that. God, because it was completely black. Yeah. This is, I think, what everybody was talking about. This trail here on the Canada highway, where it's like really slow, and then you speed up, and then you stay stuck behind somebody, and you're like on the cliff because you're like all the way down the mountain, like there.
This one?
Want some water, bud?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Look at that. Gosh. Speaking. Thanks, bud. I don't know, I didn't think of that, but show you what. And you can see even from the top. Trees.
Okay, that's it for the slow winding section of the Kicking Horse Canyon. Even though that was a little on the painfully slow side, it's now only about 1/3 of the distance that it used to be before the major improvements were made to the highway here. We're quickly going to see what looks like a huge wall built on the slope side of the highway. Yes, that's exactly what it looks like, and exactly what you're thinking. The wall is built there to catch falling rock slides and, of course, falling avalanches. When this was built, I don't think any of us had seen something like that before. Gotta say, there is a little skepticism about whether it would be strong enough to hold up against a huge avalanche, but I also have a ton of faith in the engineers that designed it. The river that we're driving alongside is aptly named the Kicking Horse River, and depending on the time of year, there may be a raging whitewater through here. Whitewater rafting day trips are big business and popular for both visitors and locals. There are 2 sections for rafting in the canyon. The upper canyon sees smooth water gradually build up to class 3 and 4 rapids. The river is at its peak usually during June, when the snow melt and seasonal rains combine to push a lot of water down the river. But more water doesn't always mean bigger rapids. Sometimes the water can get so high that it goes right over top of the rocks and boulders without the same drop-offs. So usually, the best fun is when there's high water in the river, but not quite at its highest water. If you do like whitewater rafting, or if you'd like to give it a try, the Kicking Horse River is a world-class place to join a trip and get wet. I have to say that the park bridge and the cutting through the hill on the east approach still impresses me to this day. It's estimated that over 2,000 trucks and another 10,000 vehicles pass through here every day. And this bridge is so much better than it was before. I normally try not to fire too many numbers at you, but I'm going to give you at least one more. Let me give you the facts and numbers on the construction here. The bridge rises 90 meters, or 300 feet above the river. Its length is 400 meters, or about a quarter mile. The deep rock cutting had to be blasted through at the end of the bridge. It's estimated that 2.8 million cubic meters of material was moved. 2.5 million kilograms, or 6 million pounds of structural steel was used, plus 1.5 million kilograms of rebar. 12,000 cubic meters of concrete was poured. Perhaps best of all, the bridge was completed 21 months ahead of schedule. And I think it looks pretty great too.
Snowy mountain. Yeah. It's a good view, yeah. That's the mountain. The Rockies. See the Rockies? Rockies. That's the Rockies.
I can imagine. I've never seen an avalanche in person. Imagine experiencing
Let's have an update about what lies ahead of us here. If we drive without stopping, we should reach Lake Louise in just under an hour. In about 15 minutes, we're going to enter Yoho National Park. That's the first that we'll enter of the Canadian Rockies National Parks. They are connected into one continuous protected area. Those parks are Yoho, Banff, Jasper, and Kootenay. For the 30 minutes or so that we'll be driving through Yoho, I'm just going to stick to the highway info. But I do have tours that explore the best parts of the park in detail. The tour is called the Banff Lake Louise Yoho Tour. If you don't already have it, it's my tour for driving the beautiful areas around Lake Louise and into Yoho National Park. That area is definitely worth one day of your time here in the Rockies. The other must-do drive in the Rockies is the Icefields Parkway. It's about a 50-50 split of whether visitors go all the way to Jasper or go as far as the Icefield Center and then come back to Lake Louise or Banff. Either of these are good options. It's not a good day to try and drive all the way from Banff to Jasper and then back again in one day. That is just a little bit too long, and you won't get any of the experience of exploring Jasper National Park. And again, you'll enjoy my tour of the Icefields Parkway, so I recommend you download that one if you haven't already. The next town that we'll see is called Veal. It has a population of 300 to 400, depending on how many tourists are staying in town. Services are very limited. Lake Louise has more services, but it's tiny too. Banff is the next closest town with full amenities. You are going to love watching the mountainscape change over the next hour. Golden is a lumber town, and as we drive through here, we see quite a lot of evidence of when forests have been harvested, both recently and where regrowth is taking place. Forestry management is quite a science now. It's not just a bunch of chainsaw cowboys going for total destruction in the backcountry. That's the bad old days, when the loggers would come in and clear every single tree in a section. That's the easiest and most efficient way to get the most return for your efforts. But clear cutting has a bad effect on the environment, and you'll be hard-pressed finding anyone outside the industry who doesn't think that the scars are just pretty ugly. Clear cut tends to make slopes unstable, prone to mudslides and heavy rains. Scientists also find the ability for the forest to regenerate is diminished with every tree removed. If you leave something behind, it provides a catalyst for regrowth of the vegetation to occur more quickly. Most log slopes are replanted with saplings of trees, so we're not relying entirely on nature. But if you take everything out, it just doesn't do as well as when you leave something behind. So most logging companies now perform some level of selective logging rather than an outright clear cut. It's in their own interest to be able to come back to a woodlot in 10 to 20 years sooner to harvest once again. We've been following the Kicking Horse River for some time now. Depending on the time of year, it can be a mild stream or a fast-running river climbing high up on the banks, fed by snow and glacier runoff. James Hector explored this area between 1858 and 1862. He was a member of the Palliser expedition, whose mission was to find a way through the mountains suitable for the railroad. They approached the task from the flat prairie lands to the east, where Calgary and Edmonton stand as cities today. His journal tells us that by the time his party reached this area, they weren't doing so well. They were near exhaustion and close to starving. They'd expected the hunting during the exploration to be more successful than it was. One of the pack horses escaped from the camp, and James Hector went after him. The animal was very important to their survival. As he caught the animal, the horse gave him a powerful kick to the chest that knocked him unconscious. After 3 days, his traveling companions started digging a grave because they saw absolutely no signs of life in him, although his body had not yet gone cold. The story goes that just after they were about to lift him into the grave, his eyes flickered open. He wasn't dead after all. He named the river the Kicking Horse River after the incident, and the pass was named after the river. This was a change from the more normal habit of naming things after royalty and important people in his life. Despite whatever injuries he had suffered, he continued to travel for 3 more months, walking back towards Lake Louise, up the Icefield Parkway area, and out onto the prairies, eventually wintering at Fort Edmonton. That James Hector, he must have been a very tough man. We've just entered Yoho National Park. Like all the national parks, we're required to display a valid park pass if we're going to stop anywhere. The easiest place to get a pass is at the visitor information centers. If we want to stop at a location before we reach the visitor center and field, I wouldn't be too concerned if we don't have a pass yet, since we haven't had an opportunity to purchase one since entering Yoho yet. So what I'm saying is, don't miss out on something we want to stop for because we don't have a pass yet. There are a couple of terrific side trips that we can do off the highway in Yoho. I won't have any commentary on those trips while we're on our Trans-Canada tour, but I will tell you about them, and I encourage you to come and explore the park more thoroughly with my Lake Louise and Yoho tour app, of course. Now, first of all, Yoho, that seems like a little bit of an odd name. It actually comes from the Cree Indian word that roughly translates to magnificent or wow. I hope that puts you in the mood for what's ahead.
Yoho.
After we round the next corner, we'll see a turnoff to parking for Wapta Falls. If we feel like we might like to spend an hour or so to take a relatively easy, flat walk to one of the Rockies' prettier waterfalls, then this could be a great stop for us to make. In the summer, the access road is open to take us about 2 kilometers closer to the falls. If the gravel road is not open, then it'll add about another 45 minutes or so to our total walking time. The very best time to see the falls are from late spring to midsummer, when a tremendous amount of water passes over the falls due to snow melt and glacier runoff. And I mean tremendous. What I like best about these falls is that they spill over a straight ledge. Lots of the falls in the Rockies have carved their way through rock canyons, and that's cool too. But just for variety, these falls are just a little bit different. They're more like your Niagara Falls style of waterfall. So if you're interested, turn in. Just take care entering and exiting, as the traffic can tend to zoom pretty quickly through here.
We're past it now.
I've mentioned before about the disastrous effects of the pine beetle rampaging through the forests. We consider it to be a problem as the beetle seems to be way out of control, and the beetle is causing the death of millions of acres of forest like this. Now some people would say that it's just nature, undergoing its own normal transformation. The question is, should we interfere? Or should we leave everything just to play out on its own? Some experts say yes, but other experts say no. The proliferation of the pine beetle is not natural, as it appears to be a byproduct of our warming planet. 2 things kill the pine beetle's larvae naturally: fire or extended cold snaps.
She hasn't had
And
a
by
morning
that,
poo
I
yet.
mean 2 or more
So-
weeks of minus 30 degrees
No.
Celsius or colder. We just don't see those regular prolonged cold freezes as regularly as used to happen. So these mountain slopes to the east are one of the places where park wardens and experts decided to try and stop the progress of the pine beetle from its march towards Alberta. These slopes were set ablaze on purpose to try and kill the beetle. The second part of the burn strategy is to make a big enough distance between the infected and affected trees so that the beetles cannot travel the distance and reproduce again. The pine beetles can't travel a distance of much more than a mile. Did it work? It's been more than a decade since these fires, and not absolutely clear if it's been an entire success or not. But what was achieved was that the progress of the pine beetle through this route
Well, I was
has
trying to
definitely
stop,
been slowed
like, to
down.
let him in, but
Yeah, I did.
Looked at you as if you'd done something wrong. What'd you do, Rod?
whatever. He just picked a weird time to get into that lane.
Yeah. Oh, trees, Rockies, trees, Rockies. All right, Rod. Where's the next stop, hon?
I don't know. Maybe we'll stop in Canmore. See, stretch our legs.
How many hours is that, hon?
An hour and a half, 2.
Oh, that's not far.
Where's the waterfall? But not far from
It
here.
was back there.
Oh, we passed it. Oh,
Mhm.
oh, you said it's too late now. It's
Mhm.
passed. Oh, okay. Understood what you. I didn't. I thought you meant by like buying a ticket for buying a pass for the parking lot. The park, national park was just past it. That's what I thought. I think I got a bit of a tan. What the heck are these guys doing?
Is he going?
I'm happy we didn't go to the States.
Me too.
I don't think Montana would be so. Would be so nice to look at. You know, would there still be mountains in
Oh,
Montana?
yeah, of course. That's where Yellowstone is.
Oh,
We were going very close to Yellowstone.
oh yeah. Shitty. notice the license plate, but hopefully nobody's gonna let them in. Oh, this is ridiculous, right?
Like a fucking semi in an RV, like,
Yeah.
you know, any idea how, whatever. Like, it takes a special kind of asshole to fucking try and zipper merge in.
There's a semi that stayed in the other lane at the far back road. I don't know if you noticed.
Yeah. Trying to block anyone?
Yeah, it's too bad he wasn't there before the other guys. Yeah, I see they're letting them in.
Of course they are. Because it's rude to assert yourself.
Was it eating a sandwich or something? The guy in that.
Fire in the forest of the national parks is an important issue, and our understanding of that natural role of fire has evolved. When it comes to forest fires, there are several points of view. Those who love the national parks are worried that the parks will become less beautiful if we allow fires to burn out of control. It makes sense if fire threatens buildings and development that it should be extinguished. But forest fires is just a normal step of nature. It clears overly thick forests, which allows new growth to generate. It allows the development of grassy meadows and low bushes to grow, which suits the grazing animals far better. Elk and deer, for example, find it just as difficult as we humans to make their way through thick forested areas with dead and fallen logs and trunks. But we've interfered with the forest over the last 150 years or so. The forest within the park tends to be way more overgrown than would naturally occur. This is because for many, many years, if ever a lightning strike or some other cause started a fire, we would race to put it out. If we came through these valleys 300 years ago, before Europeans started influencing the environment, we would not have seen nearly as much thick forest as we do now. There's also evidence being found that the First Nations people understood the importance of fire for healthy environment and wildlife. And they had also purposely set fires themselves to create more productive lands. So when parks and forestry officials deliberately set fires, it's like we're trying to correct the imbalance that we've already caused.
Yeah.
The Dune Road.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah. Probably expanding the highway.
Oh, sweet. And what they do with them rocks?
look at that, eh? I'll be damned.
Oh.
The semi that zipper merged in and a fucking load of empty highway in front of him. Color me shocked. No, I know. I don't like assholes, and I don't like people that don't hold assholes accountable. Of course they're everywhere, because nobody holds them accountable.
On the mountainside in front of us is one of my favorite unusual formations. It takes a little imagination, and if there's a little bit of snow, you'll find it easier to see. Halfway up the mountain, there's a round area with no trees. And coming out of the top of it, a chute that almost looks like rabbit ears. When you pull it all together, it looks a little bit like the Playboy Bunny.
It does.
Oh, yeah.
In the winter, when it's full of snow,
Can't see over
it's
the
even
window.
clearer to see the white bunny outline against the dark trees. I'm not sure if we've ever showed this to Hugh Hefner, but I'm sure he would have gotten a chuckle.
Yeah. Definitely could see when it snows too, right? The all white will stick up. It's funny.
What was the hold up the rocks they were doing?
They're just doing construction work.
Santa Claus came. Brought a present for everybody.
Yeah, I wanted to see what that was too. Thought she was coming away.
Yeah, cat. Cat. She said meow without me even telling her it was a cat.
She knows what a cat is, yeah.
Yeah. Good girl.
Through here, as we crest over small rises, if the weather's cooperating, ahead of us and off at about 10 o'clock, the view ahead gives us glimpses of the massive ice fields that are shielded by the mountains. What's the difference between an ice field and a glacier? Well, think of the difference between a river and a lake. A glacier is like a river. The ice flows and moves as if a slow current pulls it along. An ice field is more like a lake, more still and stagnant. In the Canadian Rockies, some of the best glaciers that we see are like outflows of a river of ice from an ice field, which is like a lake which supplies the ice. About the geology of the Canadian Rocky Mountains on some of our other tours inside the national parks. But because the mountains are getting more impressive with every new corner, let me give you a really brief introduction. The first thing to understand about the Rockies is that they were formed entirely by movement of tectonic plates. I think all of us know about the tectonic plates. They're the chunks of the Earth's surface and are constantly moving, although the speed that they move is incredibly slow. The Rockies formed when the Pacific Plate pushed up against the existing plate that holds North America. The slow motion collision forced great slabs of rock towards the sky, sometimes 10,000 feet or more towards the sky. The landmass that we call British Columbia today was pushed up out of the ocean this way.
Well, that was a thought where
There was no volcanic activity that formed these mountains around us now. Though you only have to go to the Purcell mountain range around Golden to see evidence that there was some volcanoes involved with shaping those ranges. We see that by the presence of granite, and some of it in beautiful vertical spires. You won't find granite here in the true Rockies. This was all built by pushing and shoving. It's difficult to put an exact number on these things, but let's use the number 70 million years ago for when all this started happening. In geological time frames, that makes these mountains relatively young. Those geologists divide our Rockies into 4 distinctive ranges. And from the air, we see those ranges divided by north-south running valleys. The oldest ranges are the ones that we're driving through now. The youngest ones are the ones closer to Calgary as we drive this way. And one last thing, the Canadian Rockies look distinctly different to the American Rockies. The distinction mainly comes in the ridges or rock above the tree line. Also, we'll see quite a lot of exposed vertical and oblique faces with distinctive layers in them. You won't see many rounded mountains with trees growing to the top as we proceed.
Her blanket is in the bag.
This one?
The main pouch, the back one. Yeah, that one, yeah. Yeah. It's in the back, you see it. You don't want it? She's like, I don't want it now.
Let me take the opportunity to tell you about the 2 excellent side trips you can do here in Yoho National Park. As I mentioned, these side trips are not part of my Trans-Canada Highway tour that we're on now. But I do highly recommend that we take some time during our visit to the Rockies to explore Yoho.
Yeah.
A great way to do this is to combine visiting Lake Louise and Moraine Lake together with the best locations here in Yoho. If you take your time, then it's worth a full day of sightseeing. And as I also said before, I have a more detailed tour that's specifically for exploring this region. Whether we're staying in Banff or Lake Louise, it's a comfortable day of magnificent views, some gentle hiking, or some more strenuous hikes if you're looking for that, and hopefully some excellent opportunities to see wildlife. The first side trip is to Emerald Lake. As the name suggests, the lake water is emerald in color, and the sunnier the day, the better the color. It sits in a spectacular location, surrounded in every direction by massive peaks. It's one of the best lakes in the national parks, and that's saying something because there's quite a few worth seeing.
Real. I don't
we also see
fucking
the
believe that
natural
asshole.
bridge on the drive to the lake. The second trip is the
can't
drive
fucking
into the
believe he
Yoho
did that.
Valley Road to see the
It's
biggest
just-
waterfall in the park,
frustrating, I
the
understand.
Takakaw Falls.
What can you do?
This
There's
is an
nothing you can
impressive
do,
sight,
right?
and another one of those not to be missed stops. And the drive to the falls is also quite memorable too, but you'll have to do the drive to find out why.
That was pretty ridiculous.
Sorry if that sounds like I'm teasing you. So, as I said, even if we're finishing our drive today in Banff, it is totally worth taking the hour drive to come back and explore Yoho National Park.
Looks like it's not his first time driving down this road.
From here to the tiny community of Field, British Columbia, we have a pretty good chance of seeing wildlife. Elk will commonly graze by the riverbanks, and especially around the grassy areas on this side of the town site. You have to be very lucky to see one, but moose are also active around here. And there's always a chance of seeing bears, both grizzly and black bears. Sometimes bears hang around the roadside munching on lush growth and dandelions, especially in the early summer when the growth of berries high in the alpine is still restricted by snow. It's never predictable, but you should always keep an eye out. Chances of seeing animals always increase in the early morning and during the evening sunset hours. We're approaching the unique little community of Field, British Columbia, and its entire population of 300 to 400 people, depending on how many travelers are staying over. Most of the people in the town work for either the parks or the railroad. The town sits in the shadow of the towering Mount Stephen for a big part of the winter. To get into the town, you actually have to drive in past the Yoho Brothers store and the Visitor Information Center, across the rail tracks, and follow the one-way streets. The town has a general store where you can get basic groceries and a surprisingly good cafe. And there's even a stylish pottery studio. On the corner with the highway is where you'll find the Visitor Information Center. There is a clean, flush washroom at the info center. Two huge mountains rise up above us here in the valley, and it's practically impossible for us to see both of them from here in the car unless we're driving in a convertible with the top down. Both mountains are quite important, but for totally different reasons. Mount Stephen was and still is famous for being the mountain that provides the unique challenges for the railroad and the ambitious lengths the railroad engineers had to go to be able to get trains safely through the Kicking Horse Pass. The other mountain is Mount Burgess, which separates the valley that the town of Field sits in from the valley that holds the beautiful Emerald Lake. Mount Burgess is a scientifically monumentous location because its shale beds contained incredibly well-preserved fossils that opened a whole new understanding of the evolution of our planet. James Walcott found the fossil beds in 1908 after reports from railway workers saying they found bugs in the rocks here. Little did they know, but those fossils demonstrated a diversity of life forms unlike anything we see today that lived under the seas right here 520 million years ago. If you're interested, you can join a guided hike to the Burgess Shale, but pre-bookings are required. So up we go. We're making our way up Kicking Horse Pass, which will finish at the highest elevation point on the entire Trans-Canada Highway. The climb isn't as long as you might imagine, and though it's steep, it's not the steepest road that we'll ever drive on. Grades or slopes like this are easy in cars, but still the trucks will definitely find themselves performing a slow, low-gear climb. Rubber on asphalt provides much more traction than steel train wheels on steel railway lines. Remember that 2% grade is about the steepest that a heavy freight train can handle, going up or coming down. So, though it was considered the best route for the railway in here, the Kicking Horse Pass proved to be extremely dangerous when it first opened. With a slope of 4.4%, twice the grade is what is considered safe. It was just too steep. Some trains just couldn't make the climb, and others flew off the tracks because they couldn't slow down enough on the way down. So the engineers had to get creative to make it safer. You can't reduce the elevation between the top of the pass and the bottom here. The only way to make the slope less steep is to make the track longer, and the gap the pass runs through is too narrow to create a zigzagging route. So what was decided? was to build the spiral tunnels. In a nutshell, what the answer proved to be was to create curved tunnels cut into the side of the mountain that kind of looked like a figure 8. So the train is essentially driving in front and over top or below its caboose end. It's a little difficult to explain in words, so I suggest we make a stop at the spiral tunnels viewpoint up ahead. The displays are excellent at explaining it, and if we wait, a train will normally pass through about every 20 minutes or so.
You stop staying behind those semi-trucks again, Ron, right? So you want to see them, right? And yet you're like, they're stuck in the traffic.
You gotta be kidding me, man.
But it's construction, okay? He's passing
Here's the parking area for the spiral tunnels. Be careful of traffic turning in and out of the car park. This is actually the most stopped at viewpoint on the entire length of the Trans-Canada Highway.
Or something with you right now. Frustration, maybe even.
This is utterly unbelievable. Trucks fucking passing other trucks on an uphill grade.
Well, right, like some of them don't have a heavy load than other trucks, you know.
Then why are they going 30 kilometers an hour?
They have as much right as us to pass some other trucks, no?
Yeah. I have just as much right to walk through the mall with no shirt on. It doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Okay, can't have this discussion with you clearly. This line ends anyway, so where are they wanting to turn? Just turn before you're stuck behind the other guy here, Rod. Yeah, you're gonna be stuck, Rod. This guy. You're gonna be stuck behind this guy here? That's actually smart enough to slow down.
This pretty lake, or large pond we're about to pass, is called Wapta Lake. It's considered the source of the Kicking Horse River. That might just be a romantic idea that this is where it began, as many different streams and runoffs all quickly combine to supply the Kicking Horse. But here's an unusual story about Wapta Lake. It's speculated, but not entirely proven, that the railroad at one time might have lost a locomotive into this lake. The suggestion is that the locomotive might have run off the track and sunk into the soft marshes around the edge. It's not proven, and no doubt there would have been some kind of cover-up to save someone's behind if it really did happen. Not too far ahead, we'll cross the highest point on the Trans-Canada Highway. In terms of elevation, at 1,627 meters, or 5,339 feet. It's quite unceremonious. Not all that steep. We won't feel like we've crossed the top of a mountain or anything like that. It's also the same place we crossed the Continental Divide. The Continental Divide is a line that divides the North American continent into two pieces. The line marks the point at which water will either run to the Pacific, which is the west side of the divide, or water will run, eventually, east all the way to the Atlantic. But what's celebrated at this high point of the Trans-Canada Highway is that it's also the border between the provinces of Alberta and British Columbia. So to mark that occasion, there's a pullout at the border with some flags flying and a nice sign if we want to take one of those crossing the border type photos. I'll point it out, but really, it's pretty tough to miss.
Going back to Alberta.
So here's the pullout for the border crossing. There's no gate, border attendant, or anything like that. Just a sign. But there are some restrictions about things that can cross the border. For example, it's technically illegal to carry BC wines into Alberta unless by permit. But how would they enforce that since there's no form of inspection at the border? Who would ever know? I guess if you were carrying a truckload, you might have to submit some paperwork for it to be received and sold in Alberta.
Okay.
Seems kind of stupid to me, and last I heard, that law was up for review.
Welcome to Alberta, everybody. So it's 11:16 now.
Having crossed the border between Alberta and British Columbia, I'm going to indulge in a little personal opinion about some of the things that are different between those two neighboring provinces. So before I upset anyone, I personally think that both provinces are great and don't have any opinion that one is better than the other. I'm just going to point out a couple of differences. The first is a major one: taxes. Alberta does not have any provincial sales or consumption tax. The only tax that will get added to prices in Alberta is GST, the goods and services tax, which is enforced by the federal government. In British Columbia, like many other provinces in Canada, when you buy something, you're also charged a provincial tax. The BC government has flip-flopped a little on this. Sometimes it's been the PST, or provincial sales tax. Sometimes it's called the social service tax, and at one time it was called the harmonized sales tax, where it was kind of blended in with the GST. No provincial sales tax is a proud Alberta tradition. And the reason that Alberta can resist the extra layer of tax is the massive royalties it earns from the oil sands. The second difference between the provinces is political. It's impossible to dispute that Alberta is far more conservative or right-winged in its politics. Alberta is often called the Texas of the North. Usually, the two major political parties fighting in elections are the Conservatives and the ultra-conservatives. British Columbia is a far more socialist electorate. BC is much more inclined to create social programs and provide social security safety nets. You buy your car insurance from a BC government corporation. BC is a little bit more like the California of the North. So, think about how much of the scenery has changed on our drive. And now that we're right in the heart of the Canadian Rockies, I'm sure that you'll agree that it is magnificent. The next highway exit we'll encounter is the exit for Highway 93 North, which is the Icefields Parkway. While you're here, you absolutely must take this drive. If you're planning to go all the way to Jasper, then you'll drive the entire length of the parkway. If you don't plan to spend a night or two in Jasper, then a day trip from Banff or Lake Louise is still a must-do. Drive as far as the Icefield Center and Athabasca Glacier before turning around to come back to Lake Louise and Banff. That will give you all the best sights of the parkway in what is a long but comfortable day. I also have an app that's a tour of the Icefield Parkway. It's good for both directions, so you'll have commentary for all your drive. If you are staying in Jasper, I have a tour of Jasper National Park too. So just check for the tour in your App Store or Google Play and download it on your hotel's Wi-Fi if you don't have it already. If we're continuing to Banff, then we'll have another 40 minutes or so to keep following the highway after we pass the Lake Louise exit. There are so many great things to see in and around the Banff town site. I do have a tour that takes you on a loop around the town. That one is called the Banff Town Site Tour. If your travel plans include Waterton National Park, then, imagine this, I have a tour for there as well. And it covers most of the 4 hour or so drive to get there. I'll point out the Lake Louise exit just ahead.
Pipes. Felt like we drove for 2 hours already. It was from 10:20 to 11:20.
If we're exiting for Lake Louise, watch for the exit lane as it peels away to our right. If we're going to Banff, just stay on the highway and we'll arrive there in about 40 minutes. Okay, it looks like we're continuing to Banff. We should arrive at the Banff exits in about 45 minutes or less. Since we're in the national parks, I'm going to request that you respect the 90km/h speed limit. Lots of people don't, and it puts wildlife at risk. The police have also increased their level of patrolling between Lake Louise and Banff, so let's not push it too hard. Just a reminder that this tour is just for the Trans-Canada Highway. To explore this area in more detail, please download my tours that are specific for inside the national parks. While you're touring around the national parks, I'm sure you're hoping to see some wildlife, and especially bears. The animals are here, but it does take a little bit of luck to see them. Let me give you a few tips on how to improve your chances. Always be looking and scanning around. There are no hard and fast rules. Animals can pop up at any time. Grassy meadows and openings in the forest are always a good possibility. Sometimes animals can be quite close to the roadway, or of course they might be further
I
away.
think I saw a bear.
But it's important to be keeping an eye open. If you see something that's darker than its surrounding, look closely, and it might be a bear. Or it could be a tree stump. Most bears tend not to like full sunny heat in the middle of the day. They enjoy being more active during cooler times, so spotting them is usually better earlier in the morning or closer to sunset in the evenings. Now, if you do see a bear, please try and resist your urge to stop the car. I know it's tempting, but the best thing you can do is to slow right down, take that picture you really want, but keep on slowly cruising by. I do hope we get to see a bear. It's one of the coolest things that can happen to us in the parks, but please follow the no stopping policy. You'll see bear jams where people do stop and even get out of their cars to take photos.
Yeah, that's stupid.
I highly encourage you, please don't do it. Parks will come as quickly as they can when a bear jam forms, and they'll haze and scare the bear away. I might sound like a killjoy, but the reasoning is when you stop, the bears lose their fear of you and of traffic. You're actually training the bear to not fear us in cars and trucks. That means there's a better chance that they'll no longer associate the highway and traffic with danger. It's heart-wrenching to see the reports every single year of bears and cubs that get hit and killed by vehicles. And almost worse than that, when bears have to be destroyed because they become habituated to human food. This makes them more brave to go into populated places where they shouldn't, in search of that super high-calorie junk food. Bears that approach human places are considered unpredictable and dangerous. So if they cannot be successfully relocated, they'll be destroyed. It goes without saying, never ever try and throw food to a bear, or even carelessly discard food in anything other than a bear-proof bin. That only contributes to their eventual demise. Enjoy the magic moment of seeing them, but avoid doing anything that might contribute to harming them.
There's those bear overpasses, eh?
It's a really good idea.
Deer?
Yeah. Could have been an elk, actually. Like a baby one. Yeah. I think it was an elk. Yeah, that, like that round, that big muzzle.
Following alongside the Bow River from here to Banff. Do you remember when we crossed from British Columbia into Alberta? I also referred to that as us crossing the Continental Divide, a theoretical line that divides North America. All the water that falls on the western side of the line will eventually find its way to the Pacific Ocean. Everything on this side of the line would find its way to the Atlantic. Well, the Bow River here is the first river that we've encountered all the way since we left Vancouver that flows east and will eventually end up in the Atlantic via Hudson's Bay.
Cool. Alright. John Waller
spoken about bears, but there are other great animals to see while we're here. I'll get the nagging out of the way quickly, okay? Do not, and I repeat, do not ever attempt to feed any kind of wildlife. Even those cute little ground squirrels. Their bodies are just not designed to handle our food. They should only eat what their natural surroundings provide them. Elk are a fairly common sight around Banff, and sometimes they can be right in town. Don't approach an elk, no matter how docile they look. The suggested safe distance is to keep about 3 bus lengths away. In the spring, the females can be aggressive because they have their baby calves. In the fall, the males are aggressive because they're competing for the females. Snap some photos, but don't get too close. Deer are also common within the town itself. Follow the same suggestions for keeping your distance as for elk. If you follow my drive out to Lake Minnewanka, you have a really good chance of seeing bighorn sheep, as a herd is always close by. You're far more likely to see a sheep than a mountain goat. If you drive the Icefields Parkway, you might see mountain goats on cliffs above the highway. If you have binoculars, good idea to bring those along. Moose are relatively rare in Banff, so consider yourself lucky if you do see one. Moose are a little more common in Kootenay National Park, and sometimes around Spray Lake above Canmore. The small critters can be fun to spot too. The squirrels that live in holes in the ground are called Columbian ground squirrels, and they'll usually not scamper down their holes unless you get really close. Above ground, you'll also see chipmunks and red squirrels. I know you'd like to see a beaver, but that is highly unlikely in Banff, though it is possible. If you see something small swimming in a river or lake, it's most likely a muskrat. Still a nice animal to spot. Finally, if you see something that looks like a dog, it's most likely a coyote. Unless it's in someone's yard, then it might be a dog. The coyotes can be quite brazen and fearless, but rarely dangerous. But if one seems to be following you, it's worth deviating away. Wolves tend to be far more elusive. Wolves here tend to be quite tall, so if it's shorter and light brown in color, then most likely it's a coyote. But wolf packs are around, so if you see them, then you have been very lucky indeed. There are some other animals around, but my list was the ones that are most frequently sighted. Good luck.
Yeah, I can see lots of goats over there. Should have brought some binoculars if you want to know, Nate. I saw an elk, and I think I saw a bear too. And one of the grassy dogs was brown.
This unmissable mountain on our left is Castle Mountain. It's quite obvious why it's called Castle, since it looks like a fortress with turrets rising from its main wall. For a while after World War II, it was renamed to be called Mount Eisenhower, as an honorable dedication to Dwight Eisenhower and his leadership role during the Allied victory. Locals were not too happy about its renaming, especially that Eisenhower canceled his appearance at the renaming ceremony. So, after much pressure, the mountain was returned to being called Castle Mountain, though the rightmost pinnacle is still nicknamed Eisenhower Tower. Castle is an example of a mountain in what's called the main range of the Canadian Rockies. In fact, this is the last of the main range mountains as we head east. Anything further along is considered to be part of the Front Ranges. The Front Ranges are considered the youngest of the Rockies, and so as we drive this way, it's like we're moving forward in geological time. I'll talk more about the interesting geology of the Rockies on our other tours inside the national parks. Behind the face of Castle Mountain is a giant amphitheater which holds Rockbound Lake. The hike to Rockbound Lake is one of the more popular longer day hikes to do in Banff National Park. But I must admit, it's not really one of my favorites. I just find it a little hot and exposed during the summer, and other hikes are more rewarding for the effort. It's worth getting advice about hikes that suit our ability and motivation at a Parks Canada Visitor Center, or pick up a hiking guidebook. One of the pleasures of visiting these national parks is to go for a hike in the mountains. For some visitors, it's their #1 favorite thing to do here. Some hikes are short, only needing an hour or so to complete. Some will require a full day. Let me offer you a few tips about hiking. First of all, before heading out, it's worth popping into the Parks Canada Visitor Center to check for any trail closures. If there has been bear activity on the trail, parks may choose to close it to give the bear some space and to keep hikers away from possible bear encounters. Please respect the closures. If it seems your selected trail is open, go for it. But talking about bears, don't be too paranoid. Bears really don't want anything to do with you and will disappear out of sight before you have any clue that they were even there. You are encouraged to make noise on the trails, especially as you approach hidden corners. Clap your hands, whistle, sing, or generally be loud from time to time. That will alert bears that you're around, and they'll move away. I've hiked in these mountains for more than 2 decades, and by following the make noise approach, I have never encountered a bear on a trail. When you hike, be sure to take lots of water and a little food for snacks. It can get pretty hot fairly quickly in the mountains, and you don't want to dehydrate or get sunburned. Longer hikes will take you high in the mountains to the beautiful alpine meadows. It's common that hikes will start out with a lot of uphill climbing, but once you get past that section, your reward will be relatively easy alpine trails with stunning views of colorful flowers and often a pristine lake or glacier view. I encourage us to get out and hike a trail or two while we're here.
I wouldn't mind it, but
Not now, maybe later. Yeah.
Like many North American frontier towns, Banff had some very interesting characters who were synonymous with its early history. The idea of packing up everything you own, which might not have been all that much, and deciding to venture off to a completely unknown place, leaving behind family and friends, and even some certainty of support from living in a civilized place, well, that took an adventurous and brave spirit. We romanticize the idea, but if you really think about it, maybe some of these people, well, mainly men, might have ventured to wild places like this because they didn't fit into normal society of the day. Maybe sometimes society rejected them, rather than choosing a frontier life over fitting into the times. Anyway, I digress a little. Banff certainly has a cast of characters from its past, and we talk about those on our travels through the mountains. But let me share a story about one of Banff's most famous, Wild Bill Peyto. The Wild Bill Saloon is named after him. Bill came to Canada from England and saw a lot of the country before he came to Banff, where he started to work as an outfitter and guide. He served in the Boer War, but after returning in 1900, he lost his wife and turned to being a trapper and a prospector. That was a much more solitary lifestyle. But after 5 years, he was given a job as one of the National Park's first wardens. Park officials thought it would be easier to keep an eye on him if he was a warden, rather than monitoring his hunting operation. His tenure was interrupted by a tour during the First World War, where he was wounded, but he returned to his post as a park warden. He was considered to be amongst the most knowledgeable people about the parklands and wildlife, and was as talented an outdoorsman as there was. But he also had a sense of humor. At one time, Banff had a zoo, and they wanted some local wildlife captured to display. Not exactly what we would consider an appropriate national parks activity today. Wild Bill was considered the man for the job. After one strenuous day in the mountains, Bill wanted to enjoy a drink in the old Alberta bar, but he didn't care for the company of the crowd there. Parks people, the story goes. So Bill's solution? He released a live lynx that he captured that day. The bar quickly emptied, and Wild Bill Pado was able to enjoy his drink in peace. Watch for Wild Bill on the entry signs to Banff.
Wow.
Lunatic.
He released a lynx.
A
lynx.
lynx in the bar.
Lynx.
It's bigger than a house cat, but not as big as a
Oh,
cougar.
yeah.
And it has those long hair things on the tip of the ears. Yeah.
I'd
Fur,
tilly
not
with
hair.
one.
No doubt you've noticed a few of these special bridges that pass over highways since we've entered the Rockies National Parks. Those are a relatively new feature. There's always been a problem with wildlife and the highway. For a national park, the amount of collisions involving vehicles and wildlife was just too high. Vehicles and trains are the #1 killer of bears. When wildlife fencing was introduced to keep animals off the highway, it was recognized that it was very important not to completely block off the ability of the animals to roam and migrate. At first, underpasses were created at fairly frequent intervals. If you follow the fencing along the side of the highway, you'll see how it leads into culverts and underpasses from time to time. This is a route past the highway for animals. But analysis of the usage of these showed that it was not very high by some types of wildlife. I guess they just find it unnatural to walk into a dark tunnel or something that looked like a cave. Some animals are okay with it, but others won't use them. So an experimental overpass was built to see if the animals would prefer to go over the highway, maintaining an open, expansive feeling on the crossing. After more than a decade, the evidence is clear that the overpasses are well used, and since the first one was built, quite a few others have followed. To monitor the activity of the overpasses and the underpasses, park researchers place motion sensor cameras. Every now and then, they'll publish a bunch of better images that are captured by the cameras. It's amazing to see the animals going about their business. And it's also a reminder that we don't always see wildlife out there with our own eyes. They most definitely are around, and we should take care while we're out hiking in the backcountry. So, though not a perfect solution, which would be allowing the wildlife to move around completely unrestricted, the animal overpasses have been a successful intermediate solution. The very best thing would be to raise the highway and train tracks above the ground through the national parks, but that sounds like a bit of an expensive project. I've spoken a little about a driving tour I have in Banff itself. It's called the Banff Townsite Tour, if you don't already have it. On that tour, I'll lead us to popular and iconic places like the Banff Gondola and Hot Springs, Bow Falls, the Cave and Basin, and Surprise Corner, which are all close to town. We then push a little further away from the town towards Lake Minnewanka, where there's a really good chance of seeing bighorn sheep. There's also a lake cruise available at the lake that takes passengers to views of some of the most contorted mountains in the park. And wildlife sightings from the boats are also fairly common, but never guaranteed. We'll drive onward to an elevated point, which is just about the best place to take a photo of the entire valley and mountains surrounding the town. Well, the gondola view would be higher than that, so this is the best one that you can drive to. Then we come back to town with a nice drive along the Vermilion Lakes and the Bow River. This tour takes anywhere from a half to a full day, depending how many of the attractions we decide to stop at and for how long. Or we can drive the entire loop in about 2 hours or less without making any stops, but using the tour as a way to decide which places you want to go back to and spend a longer visit at. It's a loop tour, so you can join it anywhere along its route. But a good logical place to begin is to drive through the shopping and restaurant part of Banff, and commentary will start as soon as you cross the bridge and drive towards the Banff Springs Hotel. I sure hope we have time to do the Banff Townsite Tour while we're here. There are 3 ski areas inside the boundaries of Banff National Park. We've already passed the Lake Louise area, and I'm sure you saw the runs cut into the side of the mountain. We'll also pass the exit for Sunshine Village just ahead. The 3rd ski area is a much smaller community ski hill called Mount Norquay. It's the closest one to Banff and uses the same exit as the first one that goes into the town. Here in the Rockies, the quality of snow that falls on the resorts is nothing less than fantastic. Skiers and snowboarders love how soft and powdery the snow is here. And there's good reason for that. In most areas, the actual amount of water content in snow is roughly 10%. That means snow is 10% water and about 90% air. Depending on weather conditions, snow can fall as heavy, wet snow or as light, fluffy, powdery snow. Here in the Rockies, because of our colder conditions, but even more so because of our low humidity, our snow tends to contain only about 7% water. That's 30% less water. And that's what makes the snow here so much fun. It's very rare, or usually only very late in the season, where you would actually have your ski clothes get wet here. The amount of snow that's received over the winter is excellent. Some more coastal resorts, like Whistler, will get more snow, but as I said, we never get wet, heavy snow during the bulk of the season. Also, if you're a committed skier, the season here in the Rockies runs from mid-November until mid-May. That's a full 6 months of the year that the resorts are open and operating. If you don't ski or ride, then that's a reminder of just how long the winters can drag out here. It's not much further before we'll reach Banff. Banff is a small town with only around 8,500 permanent residents. The rest of our population is made up of visitors and tourists. It's really quite easy to find your way around. If our hotel address is on Banff Avenue, then I suggest we take the second exit off the highway. I'll be sure to point that out. Also use this exit if we're camping up at Tunnel Mountain. If we're staying at the Banff Springs Hotel, the Rimrock Resort, or the Banff Park Lodge, it's easiest to take the first exit. I'm not going to name all the hotels, but I'll get us going in the right direction for the main hotel areas. There's also a visitor center at the first exit just after the train tracks. The main part of the town is contained in a 3-block area that's downtown. That area is filled with shopping, cafes, and restaurants. If your hotel is a little further away than a 10-minute walk from downtown, you might find it useful to use the transit service, which is called Roam. You can't miss the buses, as they're decorated with animals. They're inexpensive, and they'll also save us having to find parking if we're heading downtown for dinner. Be sure to enjoy a walk along the river one evening. And there's often small events and displays and a weekly farmer's market. Some people think Banff National Park is all about the town, but you should think of it as the place to enjoy the end of your day after sightseeing out in the national parks. There's a distinctive mountain coming up on our right, and we'll see an official viewpoint coming up with the best view to get that photo. The mountain is distinctive because it rises from the valley with an almost straight line, constant angled slope on one side, and an almost sheer vertical slope on the other side. That is Mount Rundle, and it's one of 3 mountains that tower on the town of Banff, which sits in the valley. The other dominant mountain view from Banff itself is to Cascade Mountain. Cascade peaks at 9,836 feet, or just a smidge under 3,000 meters. The viewpoint will be coming up just ahead. We're now only about 5 minutes away from Banff. This is the first exit to Banff coming up on our right. Use this exit to go to the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, the Rimrock Resort, and the Banff Park Lodge. This is also the exit to go directly to downtown or to stop at the Visitor Center first. For Banff Avenue or Tunnel Mountain hotels and campgrounds, stay on the highway. This is the second exit, so let's take this one to get to the hotels on Banff Avenue, or Tuttle Mountain hotels and camping and RV sites. Exit in the right lane here.
Check and see what charging stations they have in Canmore, please.
We're getting closer to Canmore. Oh yeah, nice.
Before we start, the following story contains a moment or two that's pretty intense and may not be suitable for young kids.
There's one by the Silver Creek Lodge. Just, there's like a road beside transport.
You're
Listening
to Radio Land. From
Going right on the edge of this highway. Number one, but
Yeah?
Yeah, so Peter.
What are
there's
the
at the
names?
Blackstone
Where do you
Mountain
wanna
Lodge.
launch into this? Yeah, we can start with this call.
There's a coast.
8, 2017,
This is a call from Bath County, Eastern Kentucky.
13:50.
They're all by hotels, but
Yeah.
lodges, I guess you could see. There's
It's
a
called
Mark's
from
Canadian
dispatch
Tire.
team.
There's one in that parking lot
That
there.
one's just a wall
Bath
plug-in,
County
right?
Station.
This is a good looking inspection time.
Yeah, it is.
Lunchtime, it's like 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Blackstone Mountain Lodge.
Gonna stop.
For a unresponsive male.
Is there one that we
That's Scotty Whiteman.
motel?
J-Bo partners in this service in Bath County, Kentucky.
Anyway, call comes in. Scotty J. hopping there.
Still 4.5 hours.
Apartment complex.
Long way to go yet.
There's an arts place.
First live two-story building.
They're strip malls.
Huh.
They're jump out, let's enter this small apartment.
And immediately when they come in off to the left
What's
is
this
the living
here?
room.
Law enforcement, chief of police was there talking to the 2 people that were alerted.
There's one at the resort and casino.
Sitting on the
That's way past there.
Right.
Well, they're all at hotels, but
And that's where Scotty is.
lodges, yeah, hotel. This one is at the, yeah, this one's at the inn.
He was laying water about 3
This one's in the, yeah, that one's like
I guess somebody in the house.
Canadian Tire, it's only a wall plug. That one's at a hotel.
Trying to find the guy.
This is at a lodge. This one.
I hadn't started turning blue yet, so I checked checked him.
There's one that's,
He was.
well, they're surrounded by lodges and stuff.
I pulled his eyelids back and checked his pupils.
There's one here, or that one, that has a little bit of a green space across the street.
What are those hotels?
Grabs his medic kit.
What's the name
Yeah,
of
they're lodges.
That's fine. What's the name of them?
It's also accompanied with Narcan.
One is at Blackstone Mountain Lodge Bike Click. It's right off. It's the last one that you'll see right off the highway. Number one.
So Jay crouches over this guy, and he takes this.
There's green space, but there's like a shoe store there, and there's like an athletic
Takes it out.
evolution in that area. Make click on it.
Guy opens his eyes.
What's going on? I grabbed a towel, started
Oh, Blackstone Mountain's a wall.
Sit him up, got him up, put him onto the stretcher.
That one is also a wall.
Take off to check the hospital. Scotty's up front.
Wall,
Jay's in the back with the patient.
Everything was good with him.
Everything was routine.
All of a sudden,
The only one that's not a wall is at a Canmore Community Arts Center.
Alright, well, we'll go there.
That's down. Yeah. That's like right on the other side of the city.
That's fine. Take me there.
Okay.
Can't describe it. It was just, it's like chewing on steel.
Scotty, while he's driving, he gets on the radio.
958 Avenue, Canmore. How do we do that now?
Just do it on your phone.
And he needs you to
Just on the phone, yeah.
Just click the address.
Yeah, I did click the address.
Made him to the bottom.
Perhaps.
Truck parked. Jay jumped out of the back and ran up to the front. Went to the passenger
It's
side.
10 minutes.
Starting route to 958 Avenue.
It's not too bad.
In 6.2 kilometers, take exit 86 onto Bow Valley Trail toward Canmore.
So what's
Do all the
happening?
values
This is
lot like that?
This is the thing
That's
that
good.
I don't know, is so shocking.
It's not bad.
Is
10
that
minutes from
Jay
here.
then checked out Scotty.
Hit pinpoint pupils, snoring respirations.
He seemed to have the exact same symptoms as the patient in the back of the ambulance who had overdosed. Wait, what? The exact same symptoms? Yeah, that's what it looked like to Jay. How does that even
I
happen?
guess it could be a
Well, so,
town. I don't think it's a city.
So Jay explained it to us like they says if you wind back, they had gone into this apartment to treat this guy who was on the kitchen floor.
Quit.
He said he believes that when they were helping him up,
Scotty had rubbed against his skin to skin contact with his forearm.
Jay said he believes that what likely happened in that moment is that whatever drug this guy had taken had now gotten onto Scotty's arm, absorbed through his skin into his system, and then like 15 minutes later had caused Scotty to pass out. Wow. That's really strange.
What made him do that?
Unusual.
That was the first part of the story.
The thing is, like, I guess what's even weird is that, like, this wasn't the first time I had heard this story.
Right, like Peter's been following this for a while.
So, yeah, I've been keeping a list of these types of incidents, and what I found is this wasn't an isolated incident. These types of things are happening a lot.
And now at 6, EMTs in danger.
There have been cases reported in North Carolina and Florida,
Where a police officer nearly died
rural Ohio, rural Pennsylvania,
from an accidental drug overdose.
West Virginia,
3 police officers in Southeast Wisconsin.
Texas, California,
Rushed to the hospital. 2 EMTs
Massachusetts,
taken to the hospital. By breaking news in Providence.
New Hampshire,
Police officers are hospitalized.
Nebraska.
3 EMTs and an officer went to the hospital.
Went to the hospital overnight.
The officer was responding to an overdose.
There's been over 100 reported incidents all over the country. So, I mean, I've been reporting on opiates for a number of years, and I guess as I was watching these kinds of incidents occur, I kind of felt like I was watching a contagion like unfold in real time.
We stayed in
And
Canmore,
I guess
didn't
when I
we?
was reading all
In 2
these stories,
kilometers, take exit
I was
86
just
onto Bow
thinking,
Valley Trail toward Canmore.
what is going on here? What's happening?
I'm Jenna. Ron.
I'm Robert Colwich.
This is Radio Lab. Today definitely kind of a mystery story.
But at its core, it's really a story about wanting to do good, choosing to do good, and then having to suddenly...
Use the right lane to take exit 86 onto Bow Valley Trail toward Canmore.
Okay. The story comes to us from Peter Smith, a freelance journalist, and it also was co-reported by Peter,
Our producer, Matt Kilty.
Hey, everybody.
Okay,
So,
Kentucky.
Take the exit, then turn right onto Bow Valley Trail. In 450 meters, turn right
So we wanted
onto
to
Bow
talk
Valley
to
Trail
Scotty
toward Canmore.
and his partner Jay
Turn right onto Bow Valley
about what
Trail
happened
toward
today,
about
Canmore.
what's been happening.
So we
Keeps
flew into
repeating it
Lexington.
now.
We drove about an hour east.
Yeah, it was some nice bluegrass hills.
Yeah, a lot of green. And we drove to this tiny little city called Owensville. And we're at the Bath County Emergency Medical Services.
Where the Bath County EMS is.
White building,
In 1.5
linoleum
kilometers,
siding,
turn right
big
onto
garage
17th
doors like you
Street.
see at like an auto shop. A couple big white Bath County EMS ambulances. It's funny, there's a washer dryer, ashtray on top of it. And attached to the garage is a one-story house, basically.
So we essentially just showed up at this place to introduce ourselves and say, hey,
Thank you. There were a few people inside.
Gary, director of the station, was there.
Yeah.
You're serving the whole county.
Yeah, I think it's 284 square miles, I think, is how big our county is.
You know about how many people that is?
A little over
In
12,000 now, I believe.
Turn right onto
And we're
17th
covering that on one station.
Feels like there's beds in back.
Yeah, beds in back. Yeah.
You'll end up just kind of like living here.
Yeah, it's basically like an apartment.
There's a kitchen. We were in the living room with Gary sitting on a couch. There's these big lazy boys, a ginormous TV. Billy Bob Thornton was on
He's a mean dude.
Munchkin.
in the show.
No,
Went
he's
too
just a
fast,
mean
or-
dude in real
Oh,
life.
No, I was
just
just
wanted to
debating
know.
on whether I was going to pass someone
We went to a
shoulder.
Willie Nelson concert and his band opened for Willie Nelson. And somebody
Yeah, so
in
we
the
stopped
audience
to fill up.
heckled him. And he just about came off the stage after it. And he called him everything but a sewing machine and a milk cow.
There's another one right there.
He made up cuss words. Yeah, he's a wiry little feller.
So we were kind of just hanging around with Gary.
It was probably like 15 minutes, and then
There's Scotty.
Scotty walked in.
That's Peter Smith.
Turn right onto 17th Street. Then turn right.
How you guys doing?
This is the EMT who overdosed.
Yeah, Scotty's the guy that supposedly overdosed.
He's in his 50s, white hair, tall.
Got red blue eyes.
How did you even find out about all of this?
I read in the New York Times. There was one line in the story about 3 EMS personnel. I don't know if that's the true story.
What are you doing? Oh, no, right turn on red.
Yeah. Cool. So then I thought there was something unusual about that, and I was curious to hear the real story.
Yeah, months.
Then give me just a few minutes and
Yeah, no rush.
Hi, Munch.
shut down and
Turn right onto 17th Street.
All right.
So eventually it was just the three of us in this living room.
set at the table or
I mean, maybe I should preface this by saying
17th
that you can't really understand this story unless you understand a little bit about what
haven't been in
EMS
this
personnel
part.
do. And I talked to some other
Turn
EMTs
left
that
onto Fairholm
told me that
Drive.
everybody has their why.
Yeah, so it's like on the other
Everybody has
side.
this thing they say. It's like, this is the reason I got into this line of business. I would say like
Of
a
the
very
town,
small
right?
percentage like don't have second or third jobs, like they don't make a lot of money, so everybody has this why. And so I asked Scotty what his
Turn
why
left
was,
onto Fairholm Drive.
and he told me the story, and I think it's a really incredible story.
It's
that
like
not
we're going
only
to the town
explains
center.
why he does what
Because
he
it's
does,
around the arts center,
but
right?
it also explained like why he holds on to certain things.
so
In 800
September
meters, the
of
destination is on
1999
your
I was
left.
involved in
958th
an accident
Avenue.
on the Pennsylvania Turnpike.
So it was early in the morning, it was raining.
Yeah, it was during Hurricane
Okay, so
Floyd.
you know where it
He's out
is?
there for work.
Cross-country truck.
Let's just leave it on.
I was going to look for the information
It
of
was a
where
Freightliner and I pulled a flatbed trailer
Where,
over the pipe on
where
So
it's
he's barreling
situated.
down the turnpike with this heavy load of steel on the back. And with the weather, like visibility starts to get bad.
it. Slowed my speed way down, probably running approximately 50, 55 mile an hour.
And he comes through this construction site.
And something happened in the front end of the truck.
Here to pop.
The front tire had blown out, and I basically became a passenger at that point. There was no control.
His 18-wheeler was like careening out of control down the turnpike and it just like skidding across the wet pavement.
And the truck lunged to the right.
There was a concrete wall there that had guardrail attached to it. It nosed into the guardrail.
Came flying back across both lanes.
Back toward the center divider, and the truck hit it.
Plowed through the center divider.
It began to like roll over.
And came down and struck
Yeah,
a
you can look it up where
traffic
exactly it
that
is now.
direction.
The destination is on your left.
Oh, there's the yard space.
958th Avenue.
Yeah, it's at the outside.
Arrived.
That's it, right?
Yeah.
I think I see it.
You think you see it? Yeah, I can't see squat.
Yep, the big green parking space.
That person just left.
Looks like it.
Sweet. Thank God. Awesome. Thanks, buddy.
What's this place then?
Just somewhere to park so that we can.
This is.
What?
Somewhere to park to plug the car
there
in.
you go.
Yeah, and this is the only one that was not a wall mount.
That's alright.
Yeah, and we could just walk around the town
Yeah.
and see.
Find a snack or something. I'm a little peckish.
Yeah. There's around this area anyway, so you could probably talk to somebody, see if there's like a little park. There's like this green spot here, but yeah.
Getting out? Ooh,
Yeah, we're getting out.
Yeah. Get your shoes on now. Where's your shoes? Yeah. Mom, I think Nana knows now how to do this. You get the shoes. Oh yeah. You get the shoes. Okay. Got the shoes? Yeah, they're right there. I know. Let's put your shoes on. Come on.
Ooh.
Oh, silly. There we go. Hey, mommy.
Hey, sweet potato. Hi, sweetie.
There we go. In your boot.